Welcome to Bold Talk series where creativity, leadership, ideas, and innovation come together. My name is Ludvik, and today I have a privilege to have a short one-on-one conversation with Ron Dembo, founder and CEO of Riskthinking.ai. Ron, great seeing you. Welcome to our Bold Talk series. How are you?
I'm fine. It's a beautiful day. It's spring. Um,
Nothing
Feeling
like
good.
spring, huh?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the trees are opening up. It's suddenly people are coming to life. Toronto's suddenly, full of people.
Well,
It's great.
fantastic. Great to see you and welcome. And give us an overview about risk thinking and what got you started with risk thinking.
It's actually a peculiar story because my background is as a professor at Yale I did a lot of work on algorithms and early days of AI, and teaching people how to model complex systems. And somehow that led to a consulting gig with Goldman Sachs in the very early days of derivatives. And that led to the formation of a company. And in a very naive fashion, I saw a problem in Goldman and elsewhere on Wall Street that you couldn't measure risk across two desks even, never mind across an enterprise like a Goldman Sachs. And so I set aside, I said, I'm going to build one, just when you start out like that, if you really know what's about to happen, you wouldn't do it. If I would know that I'd need 250 financial engineers and 85 PhDs and a budget of 60 million and whatever and 15 offices around the world and I would never have even attempted it. But you don't know that, and that's probably a typical entrepreneur story. Um, but anyway, it's part of me as a kid. Even I loved building things. I loved creating things. And when I was a kid, you'd get these model airplane kits, which were made out of balsa, and you had to get your own kind of paper to cover the wings and that. But typically, they would have missing parts. They were just poorly done. And building kits with moving parts, missing parts is you have to create stuff on the fly. And
Mm.
it's such a metaphor for a startup. So I think what gets me into this kind of thing is the desire to create. When I sold that first firm, which did very, very well, it became the largest private software company in Canada. It became the largest supplier of enterprise risk systems worldwide for finance. When I sold it, I swore I'd never get back into risk again and I'd do something different. And really, I got heavily involved in climate. But along the way, it really started to bug me when I saw how people were building systems to measure climate financial risk. They were just completely wrong.
Mm.
You know, risk in finance involves uncertainty, but it's uncertainty that you can manage because it's such short term. How do I predict what's going to happen to FX prices, in the next day, from the time series I have. But in the climate world, you're looking way out in the future. So all the traditional ways in which you can do things don't hold. But in particular, the way people thought about risk bothered me. And it's the metaphor I use for that is it's as if they were driving cars using laser beams. I look down the laser beam and 400 yards away, I see a leaf. I can see it perfectly. But to 1 inch to either side of that beam, I can see nothing.
Mm.
So you could not drive a car like that. It's too risky.
Mm.
So the best of them all take three laser beams, and point the laser beam here, there, and another. That's equivalent to saying, I pick a scenario and then I'm going to do something. A scenario is a deterministic view of the future. It's like a laser beam. Whereas you really need headlights. You need to look at the range of things in front of you and to make assessments of whether you should slow down or go faster or turn the corner or put on the brakes. And that's what's called scenario planning. What is out there today is more like what if analysis. I point the beam in one direction and I tell you what will happen. Wow, okay. How do you use that in strategy? How do you decide whether to slow down or go faster or how to hedge? You can't decide that. So when I saw that, I said, I just got to build it right. And that's what got me going on risk thinking. And the name came out of a TED talk I gave it was in Oxford in 2010. It was called Risk Thinking. And it was before they videoed talks properly.
Hmm.
And I had 500 people in the audience and non-technical people, but bright people. And I had to teach them how, in 6 minutes, how to think about risk. And I worked hard on that. I called the talk Risk Thinking and said, I'm going to write a book on it. Because people came out of it and they were really very kind, I would say. So 11 years later, I published a book, which really tries to get at how do you make decisions when there's such radical uncertainty. Think of climate, think of the weather, think of uh, starting a new company. And making those decisions was really what forced me into doing this. And creating something that solved such a big, complex problem is what turns me on, you know.
Challenge.
So,
Big challenge
yeah,
in front of you, huh?
yeah. And it is a big challenge, and we've come a long way, and it's starting to really take hold. I can see where we are right on the cusp of doing extremely well. Um, and now there's other challenges,
Yeah.
which have nothing to do with technology or has to do with how do you create a culture a culture that's oriented more to selling than to building.
Hmm. Interesting. Now, Ron, you build a lot, high performance teams. You led high performance teams before. You're doing it now. What qualities do you look for in team members?
So I look for people who are very smart, number one, and have the right culture. What's the right culture? They're not afraid of pivoting. They're not afraid of being wrong. And they're not afraid of working hard. Because sometimes when you're faced with a problem, you can't solve that problem according to a clock. Uh, you have to immerse yourself in it. You have to go through the hoops of making wrong decisions. So I like to find people like that and then give them a fair amount of rope.
Hmm. I love that. And where do you find inspiration for creativity in your work, and how do you encourage your team to think creatively?
I think one of the things that I encourage them to think of is that you really see the future. It doesn't take much now to say, when the first time you see generative AI and you ask it a question, it comes back with a half decent answer, you think, oh my God, I see the future. Or the first time you see an iPhone, which is like a little computer in your hand, even though it's a flaky little thing that barely works and whatever, you see the future. And it's what you do about it that counts. For example, when the BlackBerry people who owned 85% of the market saw the first iPhone and pulled it apart, the owner said, or the founder said, this is a computer. But he didn't really do much about that.
Hmm.
So I look around me a lot at things that are adjacent to what we're doing. I read a lot, I listen a lot to different things that are going on. And, my feeling is I often see the future. I mean, I can see what's coming. I know, for example, that you will not have interactions with software anything like the way you do today. That generative AI will change that for sure. It can't do it very well now, and it hallucinates and God knows what. But the writing's on the wall that you'll talk to your machine and it'll know you and it'll understand you and it'll be very accurate. It'll be like an incredible assistant. It's not going to forecast the future for you. And that's not what you really want out of AI. You want something that gives you the horsepower of 10,000 different, really top-notch advisors working for you.
Hmm.
And it's not they're going to tell you what to do,
Yeah.
but they'll give you the tools to guide you through that future.
Yeah. Yeah, they can find those tools for you much faster, easier, and you don't have
Yeah.
to.
So
Yeah.
so I see it completely revolutionizing software. To give you an example, we have this built this digital twin. It's enormous. It models the whole world in all of its uncertainty and all of the assets of companies in this world. But to build an interface to it in today's programming is always slow, no matter how much we evolve computer languages. To tell it, because you have to tell it precisely what you want. It can't think through, well, fuzzy stuff.
Hmm.
Like, but you can train these machines now. So it is possible right today to train us a bot that looks into all of our data and looks at all of the combinations, because the number of combinations and permutations are so large, humans can't deal with it. But a bot can answer questions on it and can do that well in a structured sense. So we've taken a very unstructured world, structured it. Now you teach a Gen AI to talk to it, and it knows all the combinations. And now you can build a new interface that's human. It's like asking it a question. Um, how can I look at my portfolio of risks in the S&P index business that I run, but the risks are coming from Europe. I'd like to know what those are. Well, that's something that's pretty easy for a bot. But if you didn't know you had to ask that question would be asked, doing that in software you'd have to know it ahead of time.
Hmm.
Whereas you don't have to know everything ahead of time, just like our brains. Um, I can drive a car. Cars are risky machines, and I come across something I've never ever seen before, but I can actually put it in context, especially if I'm an experienced driver.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very well
And
put.
that's why experience.
Yeah. Now, Ron, what inspires you to continue innovating, and how do you keep your motivation high during challenging times? I mean, today we're living in this world where there's so much uncertainty. The economy, there's too much volatility in the markets. How do you manage?
I mean, to be honest, the challenge doesn't come from that uncertainty for me.
Okay.
I thrive in that uncertainty. But the challenge comes from people who struggle with that uncertainty. Not everybody who's a COO or a top-notch CTO or CFO will be able to think in that world that well. And so guiding a very high-performance team that's very good at the silos they operate in and very good at communicating is sometimes difficult because one has to make a pivot that they can't see and don't realize. Let me give you an example. I get on a plane and I'm flying to Paris. The pilot has a perfect flight path. It's built for him with all the latest weather information. But the pilot knows that at 12 at night over the Atlantic, he's going to encounter some turbulence that nobody could have ever predicted. So he turns to the left, and turning to the left points to Iceland. And meanwhile, we're supposed to be going to Paris. And everybody in the plane says, oh my God, he's just turned to the left. He's taking it to Iceland. What's going on? And that's the thing that's hard to deal with. Whereas I haven't lost the vision of going to Paris. I just know I have to go around the turbulence. And people have trouble with that, a
Mm,
lot of people. And guiding people through that's probably much more difficult than the turbulence itself.
yeah. Now, how do you encourage risk taking um, with teams, for example? I know you mentioned a lot about pivoting, but how do you encourage that risk taking within the teams?
Well, it's more by example.
Mm,
What I do is, you know, make a change, try to explain it. If people can't really get it, at some point I have to be a benign dictator and say, okay, this is it. We've debated enough. And then do a post-mortem afterwards, where I could have been wrong in my decision, or this is why I did it. Even though explaining something ahead of time is always difficult because you're talking to people in ancient Arabic and they are modern Italians. It's hard to bridge that. But once it's happened, you can understand it and you can see the benefits of that.
yeah,
But you can also see that it's okay to be wrong.
yeah, yeah. Actually, that's also one of the parts that people don't want to be wrong, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It has to do a lot with different factors. We've seen this the last few years, where even though that the sometimes the authority were saying that that's right, but a minority were saying no, it's not right, and it was proven that it was right. And so I think that's one of the things that we're facing today in a society where the courage that people need today is like to say, well, I've done a mistake, or I did it wrong, or
But you're getting onto something interesting here. In a very random world, a world where there's a lot of volatility, and we're in that world now where there's a lot of volatility around. Uh, um, it's much harder because there is no right. In other words, when I know there's 90% chance that a car won't be coming down this road, and only a 10% chance it will be coming down the road in the next minute, I don't know whether walking across the road blindfold would be a good idea. You know what I mean? It's really 90% of the time that could be right, but there's the 10% where it's wrong.
yeah,
So in a random world or a stochastic world or a world in great uncertainty, there is no right. There's just the best you can do and how you want to hedge things. So when I walk across the road, I hedge things by looking up the road, even though it might always be empty. When I go to a green light at 3 in the morning, I look, I slow down and look both ways, even though I'm in the right. So, because I might be in the right 900 times out of 100, but the other, you
yeah,
know, 90 times out of 100, but the other 10% might occur.
yeah,
And that's what it's like. That's what risk thinking is about, is learning how to think in situations like that.
yeah,
Um, and that's I actually gave a talk yesterday to a whole bunch of bankers and regulators. And it's exactly that same thing. People say, well, how do you know that's right? You don't. How do you know that when you go to turn around this turbulence, you won't encounter other turbulence? There's no right. And so what you do is you hedge, and that's the only way you can manage an uncertain future.
Wow. Very well said. Ron, I would love to have this conversation. We don't, we have a short format conversation with these bold talks. Um, Ron, what does bold mean to you, like the word bold?
It means not being afraid to shoot for gold, when no one thinks you can do it.
Hmm, I love it. This is great. Ron, always be bold. Congrats on all of your work and achievements. I truly enjoyed this conversation and truly looking forward to another conversation, maybe a longer next time. Until next time, take care, be great, and be bold always.
Thank you. Take care, Abby.
Cheers.